All right. So a small group today, but others will watch the video later and be able to participate also in the exploration of this big process awareness during the next few weeks after this session. So I'm going to start with a short little didactic. It's not even really a didactic. It's more to highlight some of the key aspects of awareness we can target. And actually, it's really just one way of looking at it. We could look at it in many different ways, but I think it's something that could be interesting for us to explore. Some of you might have done a little bit of this kind of work if you've been to one of my trainings with Robin Walzer, or even with just her, because these past few years, doing a couple of workshops together, we've influenced each other a little bit. And so some of the things that we came up with a couple of years ago, which is not a big discovery per se, but it's an interesting way of focusing our attention on this process and looking at how we want to work. So I'll start with sharing this slide here that you've seen before, probably. Jen, my wife, actually created this slide, I think, for a boot camp a long time ago now, 6 years ago, I think. And since then, a lot of people have been using it in the ACT community, so you may have seen it at some point. Let's see, I just want to, seems like there's no background noise now, but if your microphone is open, if you don't mind shutting off your audio, so that way, once I share my screen, it's for some reason it's harder to find the button to mute you all, but okay, we're good now. So I wanted to approach this process of awareness, going back to just the basic thing. What are we doing here? We're exploring a behavior in context, right? The relationship between the context and the behavior for a client. Sometimes we know what behavior needs to be changed. The client has very good clarity of what he wants to change. Let's say, for example, drinking less or stop or quitting drinking. That could be the behavior we're targeting. Or it could be self-disclosing more, sharing more about myself, even more specifically with my partner, for example. And sometimes it's not clear yet at the beginning. We explore the client's life together, and some behaviors start to appear. Like, for example, the self-disclosing is something that maybe the client was not targeting at first, might have come up saying, I'm really depressed, for example. I have lots of problems with my wife. I don't really enjoy my work. Feel like I go I see friends, but I always feel like it's kind of superficial and boring, sort of small talks, etc., etc. And the more you explore with the client what's going on, the more there are certain behaviors that seem key to help him or her develop more maybe intimacy, and be more connected with other people, and that would be part of dealing with depression. Okay, so nothing new so far, but just wanted to reset the context. Well, nothing new. We never know, you know, sometimes you just use a couple of words, and even if it's not completely new, something clicks. So if you had a little aha moments, that doesn't mean you were necessarily behind. It just means that for some reason you had a little epiphany in this moment, as it happens to me almost every day, because I'm lucky to work with therapists almost every day and exploring this work, and often even simple things lead to interesting discoveries. Okay, and so as you know, context is made of a lot of things potentially. That it's basically defined as whatever influences the behavior. So obviously it can be pretty broad, but if we look at what we can actually access in terms of observation and in terms of intervention, it's a little more the range of options we have is a little more reduced. So there are things that have to do with the interpersonal context, for example, and it could be what's going on inside the therapeutic relationship, as functional analytic psychotherapy people like to focus on, or psychodynamic people also like to focus on this aspect of the work. It could be also interpersonal, but more in the client's life, not using necessarily the therapeutic relationship that much. It can be intrapersonal. So that's probably the part that ACT, for example, focuses on more. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, and the relationship the client has with these experiences, and also the behaviors that he engages in, the consequences, etc. But it's really more like the client's intra life. And of course, you can explore both. Let's see. Well, let's go directly now to the next slide, because I realized that I already started to present some of these points. And so, just the last point. Of course, we in this framework here, this clinical RFT, CBS, clinical CBS or whatever framework, we not only try to explore the relationship between context and behavior, but organize this relationship as a contingency. And a contingency is a relationship, behavior, context, according to the behavioral principles of antecedents leading to behavior, leading to consequence. And potentially, exploration can go in many directions. A lot of streams of contingency. There's lots of even antecedents that can come before behavior, a lot of behaviors. If we look at the class of behavior, for example, in my example earlier, I was saying self-disclosing. It's not just one thing, sharing my feelings, but it could also sharing my opinion. It could be doing that through texts, through emails, and things like that, or talking in person. And consequences can be also various. It can help me get some positive reinforcement, appreciation from others, but it can also maybe also lead to negative reinforcement, fewer arguments with my wife, perhaps, if we're able to understand each other better when I self-disclose more, maybe there are fewer fights, and so on. So what I want you to focus more specifically on today to work on awareness is the kinds of context that we can explore when we help clients develop awareness. And I organize these different types of context around three main categories, which can be sort of multiplied by 2 if we look at subcategories. You'll understand in a moment. So the first category is what I was saying a moment ago, the intrapersonal. And I was saying that's, in my opinion, something that's particularly emphasized in ACT, for example. So we're talking about thoughts, emotions, feelings, sensations, and behaviors that are connected to these experiences. Whether following these experiences, I think it's not safe to share my feelings, and the behavior I do is to lie, for example, or not say anything, change the topic of a conversation, etc. And then it can be as a consequence. I think maybe I'm thinking I might have a feeling of disappointment, for example, for doing that. I think, oh, once again, I avoided the conversation, but I might also have the thoughts, maybe that's what was safer to do in this moment. So I might comment on the behavior I just did. In terms of feelings, could be anxiety before, and then it could be a relief, and then it could be frustration, anger, and so on and so on. So that's for the intrapersonal, and we'll explore that more together, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on these different dimensions and see what resonates most with you in your work. What are the areas where you feel like you might want to improve more, because it's an area that you don't explore often with your clients. So we'll have a discussion about that. And then interpersonal, verbal and nonverbal social cues, anything that can happen in an interaction, basically, and related behaviors. The related behaviors, I mean the behaviors of the clients. We're trying to improve the client's awareness, and so we are going to help them notice these cues. For example, what are you seeing my face right now? What is what facial expression do you see? And then related behaviors. And of course, it's crossed with intrapersonal. You can from there also explore thoughts, emotions. What do you think when you see me smile? And what do you feel? What are the feelings that come? And then related behaviors. Okay, so what do you want to do now that you have identified your feelings as you see me smile? Right, that could be an exploration like that of streams of contingencies, starting from seeing my smile, the therapist smile, and the client responding to that. So already we see that we have two categories, but they are connected. They don't have to be, but they will often be connected, and we can take one route and then another route depending on what we find and what seems to be useful. And the last one, which I call environmental, I don't know if it's a great term, but I could also have called it all the other kinds, situational maybe. So whatever works for you, you could rename it. I'm talking about what's not interpersonal and what's not intrapersonal. I'm talking about how I respond to weather, for example. Like right now, it's cloudy outside, but there's a little bit of sun. It has an impact on me, on my mood. When the sun hits my window, I know that I tend to feel a little more optimistic, for example. And if it goes away, it will probably impact my feelings. And then so, again, the connection with intrapersonal. I just said I feel more optimistic, and maybe I'm talking more. Maybe because I'm in a better mood, I'm more open in our discussions today. And you see also the interpersonal immediately. I'm more open to you, I'm more likely to listen, maybe be less defensive. And all that, maybe not only, but could be in parts influenced by the fact that there is some sun hitting me right now. So time, space, situation, time of day, where I am, if I work in a restaurant, is it crowded or is it very quiet? All these aspects. So I think when we have these three dimensions, we've covered everything potentially. But the last thing we need to say is that we can conduct this exploration inside and outside therapy. What I mean is either in the therapy room, if it's interpersonal, for example, it's inside the therapeutic relationship, so the typical exploration made in FAP, as I was saying. Intrapersonal is whatever the client is feeling, experiencing in the moment in the room, or in the moment, or even 10 minutes before, but it's inside the therapy context during the session. Environmental could be also in the therapy room. It's a little more limited, but even if you move inside the room, sitting on the couch or standing, writing on a board, getting close to the window, or even if you work in an institution where you can go in different places, different rooms, or outside, it could be also something that's relevant to explore. And if it's outside therapy, of course, the potential is much larger. Interpersonal, it can be potentially with anybody, even imaginary people. Imagine you had a conversation tomorrow with your most favorite character from Game of Thrones. I was watching the last episode yesterday. It's in my mind. Imagine a conversation with one of the favorite character Game of Thrones. What would you want to tell them? I don't know. I have no idea where they would go, but it's we can do it. So that's what's great about language, right? We can create anything if we want. And let's see, interpersonal. Intrapersonal is going to be the exploration of what the client is experiencing more in terms of emotions, sensations, feelings, etc., but more inside in his life. So, for example, the client talks about an interaction he had with a friend a couple of days ago, and as he's talking about it, the therapist asks, "So, what were you thinking when he asked you how you're doing, and you said, 'Oh, I'm fine'? What were your thoughts there? What were you feeling, etc., etc." Okay, so I think that's our general organization for this session here. And I'm going to go back to you, and I'd like to hear some of your thoughts. So here's how I would like to orient our discussion before we move to practice. I would like to hear you first on, and given that we have a small group today, I think we could do a round, not too long, but so we can hear everybody. I'd like to hear if you have a dimension of this context that you tend to explore more with clients. So it could be in terms of awareness, but also in terms of intervention. It's quite normal that they would be connected, of course. And if there is an area that you tend to do less, and if you can identify why, so both the one that you do more and here's why, I see how it works, for example, certain kinds of clients, certain kinds of situations, or because of my background in a certain approach. And same thing with dimension when you feel like, I never really think of it, or I never really feel very comfortable doing it, or with certain clients, I prefer not doing it. So you don't have to cover everything, but I'd like to hear some thoughts on what you tend to do and what you tend to do less. So whoever wants to start, you can take a moment to think also a little bit about it before.
I can start. So I think this is really interesting because this is something I hadn't thought about before.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, given that my training has primarily been in ACT, or I had this really experiential ACT training without really knowing that's what it was, sort of the first time I'm realizing that that intrapersonal is sort of what's become most comfortable or habitual for me. And I think I go to environment to sort of put a container around it, and then reach more toward, like, then get further intrapersonally, and then how that relates to the environment or other people. But what I'm noticing is that more and more I've been working in an interpersonal space, and that's been a struggle for me. And I just hadn't really realized that, oh, well, it kind of makes sense that that's where I would be struggling more, because it's just sort of habitual to go to the intrapersonal.
It's really great that you're able to notice that and the struggle, right? And do you feel like you have a sense of where the struggle lies more specifically, beyond the I'm less used to it? Is there something that seems to be a little
well, I do, and it's funny because, of course, now I'm going back to the intrapersonal within myself, which is just this, like, I think I have this rule that's like, don't think you know the answer, or be really careful that you're not the one thinking you know the answer to the situation. And I think that I'm just realizing this now, that I'm probably pretty cautious when it comes to interpersonal situations, because I think that I worry, I'm concerned that I might jump to having my own kind of, here's the answer.
Interfere with the client's own awareness of their own stuff. I totally see what you mean, and I have a similar rule, and I think it is very much related to my emphasis on tracking, and I want to help clients become better at tracking, and I want to help them move away as much as possible from clients. And it's hard, of course, when you're helping someone, trying to help someone. So everything you do potentially can influence them in a certain direction. And so my sort of main stance, first intention, tends to be more using the sort of mirror metaphor of, like helping the client see herself. And I'm here, it's a Gareth Holman, who's a FAB trainer, who once used the metaphor with me, saying it's more like I'm holding the mirror in a way to help the clients know themselves, but I'm there just to hold the mirror. Now I have evolved toward using more interpersonal, and I feel like I still need to make more progress in this area, because for so long I tried to not remove myself completely, because I feel like I was very, very much present the whole time, but always being careful not to be involved personally in that dynamic. And now I'm using it more, and I realize that the benefits. So we'll talk about that, and maybe some of you, especially those who have the FAP background, could say a word about that. How do you involve yourself? And again, there's the interpersonal stuff that's the client outside the therapy room. That might not be where it's the most challenging, I'm guessing, right? Because you can still say, what did you say to her and how did she respond? And then, okay, but that's when you start to use more your thing, that it becomes a little trickier, right? So, okay, we'll explore that. Cool, thank you, April. Who'd like to share some, and if you want to respond a little bit to this point here, go ahead, and then you take off on your own. Yes, Michael, go ahead.
I think it's similar, although it drives me crazy when I'm trying to split things up because it doesn't. It's interesting. It's actually it's frustrating, and then at the same time it's interesting because I can see how things are different when they are split up. Sorry. So I think I tend way toward the intrapersonal too. Okay. I mean, in terms of watching my own experience and in directing people back into their own experience, and where this has been sharply contrasted recently is the group I'm part of has been getting into radically open DBT.
Oh, yeah.
And had half training where the emphasis is so much on social signaling.
Yeah.
And I find myself constantly coming back and leaning on the intrapersonal, and seeing everything and seeing all behaviors as somehow trying to control internal experience. Mm-hmm. And yet they keep getting us to point toward, the signaling and having clients look much more at what the influence of their behavior is on other people. And I just find it really challenging because I'm realizing how I don't see things that way. They even talk a lot about the rewards of like controlling behavior. The reward as being a lot about the being able to manipulate and control things outside. And yet I keep seeing it as behavior that controls something inside, that it has more to do with what changes inside the person. And so it's been a real interesting edge for me.
It's interesting to hear perspective with the radically open DBT. I think you know that, but just to clarify again for everybody, we identify these different types of contexts, but they are always interconnected, and you can choose to connect them or separate them for if it's useful, right? Again, I think in practice we keep going back and forth, but if there is an aspect of the context that we're not touching on enough, that might be relevant, that might be playing an important role in the client's behavior, that's where we feel like, like for example, the other day I was doing a training in North Carolina, actually, where Holly is, and somebody plays a client who I asked them to be a client, a challenging client, difficult client. So we start, and she's talking about I don't really know much what's going on with this client. She didn't ask really. But she starts complaining about something with her supervisor. Apparently she's a student and she's not happy with the way the meetings that she has with the supervisor go, and she's complaining. And so my natural move is to go with more intrapersonal. And even if I go into the interpersonal, it's inside the client's life. So, okay, what happened? And so how are you feeling? And I bring it to here too, but more intrapersonal too, so that you seem frustrated right now, or you seem angry. And after a while, I really feel like we're not going anywhere. We're gathering information. She seems to be pretty good at exploring her experience, reporting information, even maybe discovering something to some extent, but it doesn't really seem like there is any transformation really. Seems pretty superficial. So there's a little bit of that cat and mouse kind of feel, like, oh, we're finding something, but you're going there. And so at some point, I paused and I say, sorry, can I step back just for a moment? Can we step back for a moment? Just because and then I went actually to my more intrapersonal stuff. I guess that's, and Robin Walter emphasized that quite a lot in her work. And I didn't mention it in his on this list because I was thinking from the client's perspective. But if you look from the therapist's perspective, one part of the context that can be useful is your intrapersonal stuff too, right? And maybe even interpersonal if you think about your relationships and how they might be something similar with your clients, of course. But anyways, I went back first, paused, and tried to reconnect more with the purpose and trying to think, okay, I'm wanting to see some transformation, something that's some discovery. We're focusing on awareness, so I'd like to see something happening, like nothing's happening. And so just by refocusing on a sense even of purpose, noticing that it was not working, I just shared that. I said, I'm not sure I'm being very helpful here. I feel like we're asking you questions and we're engaging and all, but I'm not sure, quite sure. And so I brought it back to the clients, and so I wanted to hear her perspective and that is it helpful? And that shifted completely the conversation to something different, which was, no, she was not happy. It's not helpful. She's frustrated because she feels like the therapy is not working, or that's and so we started to talk about what she wanted from therapy, and it was an opportunity to reestablish some common goals, and which was much more productive from there, right? So I said all that because it's, to me, what guides the exploring a context or another remains the utility, right? But you don't know necessarily ahead of it. If you see that there's a place we're not getting anywhere, is there a part of the context that we have not explored right now? Like you could be in the interpersonal stuff, for example, and then at some point you're like, it's kind of weird because I feel like I'm being open and warm, and usually with my clients that helps them open, but that nothing changes. What if I ask the clients how they respond to some of my questions, for example, but not just like how they respond to me, but also does it activate certain things, certain rules, for example, inside, like maybe sharing feelings is silly, or it's not interesting. I want to talk about my thoughts or something like that. And if you start to explore that and you get a bit away from the interpersonal context, but actually explore more what's about the clients per se here, maybe you learn something that could get you unstuck and then go back to the interpersonal again. Does that make sense here? I don't know if my example was very clear, but again, the idea is that they interconnect, and you can choose one road to help the client move a little bit and then go back to another. And some of these models tend to focus mostly on one of these contexts, which I think explains in part why they are not so effective with certain kind of clients.
And just to follow, it's interesting to notice that doing a lot of FAP related work seems to keep, even though it's so interpersonal, it seems to keep pointing back to, how do I respond? How do I feel about this? How am I responding to it internally? And then what do I do in response to that? Yeah. And that kind of that flow. And I'm just realizing I lean really heavily on what changes inside each time.
You mean in contrast
for
to
either person,
how it impacts the other person, for example?
Yeah, what changes for me inside, what changes for you inside.
Interesting.
Yeah, sorry. Just the finish of that thought.
Yeah. Thank you. Who'd like to share some thoughts on this topic next? Holly, go ahead.
So I really come from a FAP perspective.
Yeah.
And what you were saying, Matt, seems actually very related. Like it doesn't seem separate at all to me. It seems that coming from that interpersonal perspective is a map to how I functionally help a client sort of assess what they need in that moment. So while I agree with you, I've gotten stuck in the interpersonal sort of, I guess, web, or loop that when I can stop myself and see what the functionality of the interpersonal connection is, it can help me really move in the direction of, I guess the intrapersonal part would be like a CRB, right? Like what is the thing that's stopping the client or me from connecting with each other more effectively?
Just to clarify for those who might be
familiar,
the CRB is clinically relevant behavior. So it's you're saying that as you explore the interpersonal stuff, you might end up finding a behavior in the client that gets in the way of interpersonal process, right? Or something that you need to improve, like self-disclosing or awareness of your own feelings, so that you can actually share them. Am I?
Yeah. It's like a behavior in session that is kind of problematic, or which would be a 1, or a behavior in session that is an improvement.
Yeah.
So with what, I don't know if you got to read my email that I wrote this morning.
Yes, yes, I did.
Right. So this client came in, and through exploration, I think what she really needed, and what she told me, because I asked her, what is it that you need from me? What would make this helpful? She had been sexually assaulted by someone in a massage envy. And she didn't actually see it. It was really while she was face down. It was pretty terrible. Mm-hmm. So, and everyone's telling her it's not your fault. It's, and she's incredibly courageous. She's going to court today and trial today. But what she needed from me after we explored that is somebody outside of her environmental social network to be able to have a more objective stance on whether this was indeed her fault or not. Mm-hmm. Right. So I was pretty directive, and we sort of brought up some data, and we sort of looked at, 7 in 10 women do not report, all of the data that is really just at everybody's fingertips right now. So 2 sessions, and I think I'll see her again, but it completely transformed her intrapersonally. But she was able, when I brought that up and I said, let's examine this together. How can I be of help to you? And I told her about my experience with my daughter, and it seemed to be very helpful. And she is in court today, as I said. So she texted me a little bit last night. But being able to be more directive in rather, how do you feel about this, and how do you access this? And I realized that this was a traumatic situation and not something that we were uncovering that was a little bit functionally different. But it helped me, like when we were talking about pragmatism, right? It was kind of like, this is what is going to work right now in this moment. But because of the work that we did last time, it really helped me sharpen that awareness rather than just going in for the directive. Rather than just
going like choosing to be directive because that's what's needed here.
Yeah. So it was really helpful to look at that in those sort of frames. I think, I don't know if it was a hierarchical frame. I'm not really sure which frame. Those are things I get a little hung up on, is because they seem to be interconnected also.
Can I
help her track?
Can I respond to that a little bit? Yeah.
Sure.
So I think I read your example, and I think it does connect, I think to, let's see. I think you decided to be directive in the sense that you decided to shape her way of conceptualizing her experience in a certain way. And you did an intervention that was really like, I don't know if I could say top down, maybe, I don't know, or it's, you think if she can conceptualize her experience in this way, it's going to help her, right? Yes. So that's the normalization. If you say it's normal, or it's not normal, actually, as a way of normalizing too the experience of abnormality, if that makes sense, right? So it is pragmatic from your perspective because you choose what's working, but I would not say that you're shaping her pragmatism. From what you said, I don't think you shaped her pragmatism. I think you shaped a conceptualization of her experience, which can be useful. I mean, I think you targeted more integration for her, which is the other pillar of functional coherence, and we will talk about it at the next session. When you say, what was the exact thing that you said? Oh, it's not her fault. Let's see. It has something to do with agency, right? How she conceptualizes herself inside this story. So why am I thinking integration pragmatism? Well, we could explore that more, but I don't want to get too off track. So I'll just name at this point that the idea was to shape a certain conceptualization of herself and her story. Right? So I think it's a perfectly justified intervention. There are probably other ways, but to me that makes perfect sense. I do that also often when I feel like there is something that the client could really use in terms of conceptualization, and that I think I'm confident enough that this is not something that needs different perspective on. It's not really something that is questionable. And there's not a lot of things like that. To me, things like the sense of continuity of self is something that I can assume the client has. If the client is human, they have an observation behavior throughout their life. And so I don't have to wonder if they do that. So I could do a didactic a bit on self as context without necessarily using these words, or I could do an experiential work, but with the idea of developing the client's observation of their perspective taking, because I don't have to pretend that I don't know if it's there or not there. It's just, it is. Another thing is, for example, if I think that it's good for the clients to see emotions as something that are normal experiences of human life. I have no problem saying that to a client and teaching them that, because that's so fundamentally inside the whole philosophy of my work. I can be transparent about it. I can say, you know, you might find people who would say something different, but honestly, saying that emotions are a normal thing in the human's life, I can't really think of any psychologist of any tradition that would say something different. So I'm okay with this kind of things, or explaining how values bring positive reinforcement and the difference with the goal. That's not a problem either. So I think what you did here to me makes perfect sense. It's a choice at some point, right? There's also a part of the culture that says it's not. There's science. There is the culture too that says what's normal and not normal. What I would encourage us to do in situations like that is to see to what extent the client's own experience cannot be still brought inside this intervention, consisting of shaping the conceptualization. Because even if you think that the conclusion they will come to, if they can adhere to it, is going to be helpful, if you can include them still in that process so that they can like make this conclusion more their own and not just the therapist told me, right? It's not quote, my therapist told me it's not my fault, but like she can really fully understand why it's not her fault. I think it can make a difference. Sorry, I was a bit long. Do you want to?
Well, we did some perspective taking, right? So if this were me, what would you say to me?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
If this were your daughter, if this were your sister, if this were your mother, what would you say to her? We also kind of really worked on sort of that overarching sort of values piece. Like, how do you want to show up on Monday? Yeah. Like, rather me saying, you show up strong and you show up with data and you, right, which I wouldn't do. But intrapersonally, I certainly wanted to. You know, I wanted to say, let's arm you as much as we can and send you in there like a powerhouse.
So, Holly, can we explore that a little bit? Because what you brought up, I think, to me, touches more on the processes of integration, and there was a question around pragmatism. But at this point, we are not really connected to awareness, and now I think we're doing it a little more. You said interpersonally, you wanted to. Can you say that again?
Yeah, intrapersonally. So I'm looking at my own
your own thing,
my therapist behaviors. because of things that happened to me in my life, and because I'm an organism, right, that's breathing and living in the room too, I wanted to say, all right, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
We're going to go in there on Monday and we're going to whatever. And so rather than doing that, which my awareness, I think, like helped me slow down a moment and ask her what she want. How did she want to show up on Monday? What was important to her? How
so
did
you
she
actually remove yourself a little bit from the from the story here, not completely, because you're still the one asking her, and that's an important part, of course, of our context, to be asked that, especially by someone of authority, we could say, or expertise, but ask her what she wants. It's actually a pretty big deal in terms of increasing agency, and for someone who's a victim, it's huge, right? I mean, it's, in a way, it's trivial what I'm saying. We could talk about it all the time, but if you think of it in this way, it helps you focus on beyond the culture. It's like the principle. Someone here has a sense of agency that's decreased as a result of being controlled, and being in an environment that's not currently helping her gain power. And so what can we do to empower her and in a way that's going to be helpful to her too, right? Because it's not just being empowered, but in a way that's going to work. And so I find interesting that your movement of thinking, I want to help, but at the same time, if I help in this very directive way, is it a way of empowering her? Honestly, it could or two. It's not, there's a lot of options to help our clients. As long as you don't keep going in a direction, well, actually it seems like, the more I'm directive and explaining and everything, well, I thought I would normalize and help the clients get more power. And actually I realized that I'm building more clients. The client is just going with whatever I'm saying, for example. And there's not much that comes from her. So maybe actually I need to fade that a little bit away, and how can I reconnect the client with her own stuff, right? Does that make sense? I'm saying here, yeah. Okay, I would like to continue the round because we're gonna get very quickly behind, but we can come back also to this situation, Holly, even on the discussion list after, if you like. Lucia, Stefan, we haven't heard you on the different types of context. How is there domain that you feel more comfortable with, and why, and one that maybe you explore less? Lucia or Stefan, if you want to pass, that's fine too. You might not be inspired in the moment. That's okay.
I don't know if I have much to add. I do feel like some of them said that I do pay a lot more attention to the intrapersonal one.
Inside?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In some situations, but it's more like when I feel like it's necessary, I might pay a bit more of attention to the interpersonal in session, in therapy.
Okay.
Like what's happening between the two of us. If I feel like maybe I'm saying something and it's just, I don't know, I feel like there's something that's happening between us. I did notice that I hadn't thought about it, that I rarely use the environmental one, the situational one, except when I'm more like wearing sort of my DBT hat and I'm trying to do sort of a chain analysis of like self-harm or something like that.
And so you're more likely to explore all the pieces,
So I think it's like I have it in my head, I have to do this, I have to explore this, so it's easier, but it doesn't come naturally if I'm not thinking in terms of that. But I thought it was interesting as you were saying it, like thinking about things like how the weather can influence how we're feeling and what we're doing. And it's something that's not normally in my head, except so.
No, it's again, I think a good way of integrating what we're working on today in your practice in the coming days and weeks is to think of clients with whom you feel a little stuck and thinking, let's look at what we usually explore in our conversations together and see if there is a part of the context that we never touch. It could be interesting perhaps to explore that and see what will happen. Thanks, Lucia. Stefan, any thoughts on that?
Yes, well, this is an interesting perspective. I didn't think about this in this way, in that way. So usually I would say I focus on an intrapersonal level. But lately I put a lot of emphasis also on like public behavior, because this is what I usually focus on or something.
You said public behavior, so you mean the behaviors that you can observe from your side?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because this is difficult for me, because usually I still have this habit to think about behavior, public behavior, and
I'm sorry, I didn't hear well what you were saying, Stefan. You're saying I didn't hear this last part.
When I say behavior, to think only on public behavior.
Yes,
because
yes,
everything.
yes.
So
yeah.
This I still have to exercise.
Yeah.
But usually, what I do a lot, because I thought that I use meditation, kind of meditation in therapy, and we do a lot of internal exploration. But it's not working with all the clients,
Yeah.
Some clients come even like annoyed.
Yes.
Why don't ask
yes.
about
Yes.
this?
Yes.
Things like that.
Yes.
This is not. But
yeah, can I just answer to that point, Stefan? It's a client. Some clients might, let's say, resist for some reason going to certain places, right, to certain kinds of contexts. And therapists too, as we were saying earlier, April and I, this rule about if you start to involve yourself, it's not going to be about the client anymore. There's that risk. And so clients some will not want to explore sensations, for example, because they don't see the point. I tend to have a hard time with sensations personally, because I don't think it's something that was very emphasized in my cultural and familial development. Asked about sensation, what they mean, and sharing them. So now it seems often I have a hard time integrating them in my self story and even in my work. I still feel a little bit awkward if I ask clients what they're feeling in terms of sensation. I feel like I'm almost like changing the topic. It's hard even after all these years, and I teach it. Fortunately, I'm able to see the utility outside of my conceptualization. But when it comes to doing it, there is a bit of a mental barrier there where I'm like, feel awkward. What's the point here? And I've heard other therapists in the ACT or RFT community say the same thing about sensation, actually. For others, it might be thoughts, right? It's like, oh, well, because this whole idea that thoughts is content and it's not the important thing. Depending on your background, first sort of theoretical background, it might influence you quite a lot. But clients are the same. There are things that they will touch on, not because they might have certain rules around that. I think it's really helpful to touch on different contexts at some points, especially during the first sessions, as a sort of a quick assessment. Even if you said to a client, if I ask you a bit about your sensations and things like that, what would you say? Is that something you would feel comfortable with, you would find weird, you would like, you would be curious? It can be also a way of understanding what you're going to deal with in this work with these clients. That they might be part of the context that they're not going to be comfortable with, and perhaps that's part of the case conceptualization. Perhaps that's the rule that blocks it, might be part of the case conceptualization, or the lack of skills in doing that. Perhaps the lack of awareness of sensations.
In this case that I told you, it was a lack of skills.
A lack of skills, yeah.
But but here, yes, it's also my my not problem, maybe a little bit problem too, because for me it's easy. You know?
Mm-hmm. It's easy for you to observe your
Exactly,
intra thing. Yep.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going very easily in that direction with the client, especially if it's not clear for me what he wants from them.
Yeah.
Even if they give me some very general clues, and so yeah, this can happen.
Can you just clarify? You said when you don't know what they want, that's when you will tend to go more with intrapersonal.
Yeah, because it's something that
But it's something that you know better. Okay.
Because it's something what I know.
Yeah. Okay. I see. No, it's interesting. I think, I mean, as a conclusion of this first round of discussion is, I would say, it's just interesting to me to recognize our to-go moves, our typical ways of working with clients, and to some extent, if they are adapted to what the client needs. Right? I mean, I joke sometimes with my students because they don't have this whole perspective. I'm thinking of my students at the university don't have this perspective with what you have when you have more experience with clients and being trained in different models. But you know, like when you ask and how are you feeling right now, it can become a gimmick, right? It can become a filler. You think that it cannot go wrong if you ask what the client is feeling, but actually it could be completely irrelevant, or it could not be the most important, useful thing to do in this moment. And yet it's still an exploration of the context. It still might bring some awareness, right? So in some ways, what could go wrong, right? But maybe there is something more useful than that to explore in this moment. Or at least, what are you trying to do here? What is your intention here in exploring this part of the context? Right.
For example, with this client, I start to work more in values and public behavior, and it's working quite well.
Yeah.
Not so much internal exploration because of, it's just
well, and with cultures and gender and lots of other variables, also you can expect different responses to exploring these different kinds of context.
I think this here in our culture, this is still strong. This gender.
Men talking about feelings and
yeah. And I think this is also going that you don't have the skills because you never do, or maybe even your family doesn't ask you, or you don't have this kind of training.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody cares about your feelings because you are a man, for example.
Yeah.
And then you don't know actually. Even if it's difficult when you ask, okay, but how do you feel? But you feel something, I don't know. But it's sometimes difficult to accept this answer. But
Okay, so I'm watching the time, and I want to move to the practical part, especially because I know that Michael and Holly have to be 15 minutes earlier. Perhaps one of you will want to be a therapist in the first part, so you have a chance. Client might not work as well because if you have to leave, but we can always work something out if we don't have other volunteers. It's always possible. So first, is there one of you who has a client who I like to work on situations that are challenging for you, where you are a bit stuck, because that way it's particularly useful to see in situation where it's difficult, but also you can leave the session with perhaps some new ideas of working with these clients. So if one of you has a client that they feel stuck with and they'd like to be in a role play during this hour here, we could do that. So I'm concluding your work is going well these days. Nobody you're stuck with. I'm kidding. I know that's not necessarily the reason, but or more openly, is there anyone who would like? I'm gonna start like this way. Someone who would like to be clients today, and regardless of the situation, we can work on any situation to explore different contexts. No, nobody is tempted. I can be clients today. I'm actually even happy to do a role or real play, depending on what you prefer. But then I will need, for sure, I will need a therapist. Is there anyone who would like to be therapist? So to explain first phase, I would like you to do whatever you want to do without specific instruction. You explore what's going on for me. Let's say I'll be the client. And after this first phase, which won't be too long, we'll pause and try to explore together. Okay, what do we know about this client? What's our case conceptualization with these few minutes, even if it's just short? And from there, we think, okay, given that, what would make sense in terms of next move, choosing an emphasis on different dimensions of context, whether it's by exploring or already maybe some kind of intervention. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, Michael, so you raise your hand. Do you want to be therapist?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start, and then I'm sure we have time for at least another
I said I would.
That's right. Okay. Okay. So let's turn off cameras, and I think when I'm client, I like to be to do a real play, because I feel like given that it's me, I'm trainer, I know what I'm getting myself into, and I'm actually very happy that to have people do case conceptualization on me. I have no problem with that. But I don't want to do that when it's someone who's part of the training. Even if they're okay with that, I don't want to. But I can do it. So I'll choose something personal, and
Okay.
And then so explore it the way you want with me, and then we'll pause, and everybody, you're free to case conceptualize me. Not a problem at all. Okay, so
Okay.
Here's the thing I would like to talk about. It starts from a sort of anecdote, but I think it connects to things that are important for me. So I thought that could be an interesting thing to explore for me. So last week I was doing a training, as I was saying, and it was the first time I did a training on site in person in the US in quite a long time, actually. I wonder if that was not when I came to San Francisco, except for ACBS conferences. And I've been doing a lot of trainings in the past years in person, but not in the US. And I said that because I think I might be part of the relevant context here. Anyways, it was something that I've been doing, nothing particularly new, so I was becoming quite comfortable. And as soon as I started talking to introduce myself and trying to create a bit of atmosphere in the room, as I usually do, I felt immediately quite nervous. My mouth really got dry so fast, it was unbelievable. And so I kept talking and introducing the workshop, but I was feeling nervous. Fortunately, because I knew my stuff quite well, I was able to do it fairly well, but I was not feeling comfortable the way I usually feel comfortable. And at some point, I realized that my mouth was so dry, and I realized that I needed to drink something. And I realized that for maybe 30 minutes, I had been very thirsty, and I was still not drinking any water or coffee that I had on the table. And I mentioned it to the group. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said, "Oh, I realized I'm thirsty," and I think I did as a way of sort of illustrating awareness. You know, I'm not aware of what I'm feeling right now, and that's what happened. I said, that's an example, right? I was thirsty for 30 minutes, and I was not responding to this need that I have, and I was not noticing that I have a cup of coffee right there. I could drink it. So that was my way of illustrating. But then, and that's where I want to explore perhaps a little more, I started to think of why I actually didn't respond to this feeling of thirst. Because, okay, I was busy doing something, makes sense. I very focused on talking to people, but I still felt a little strange because I was very aware that I was thirsty, in fact. It's not like I was not aware of it. I was very aware that I was thirsty. My mouth was very dry. I really needed water. That would have been very helpful, actually. But I didn't do it. I have some thoughts about what's going on in there, but I guess I'll let you.
So far, it's not experientially clear. I mean, it sounds like you're thinking about possible reasons.
Yeah. I've been thinking a little bit of possible reasons, and I'm not gonna share them right away so that you can explore it with me. And I'm not even sure, anyways. But for me, the reason I'm bringing it up is there is something that I know is bigger than just, oh, I was not aware of it, but I'm very thirsty. There is something deeper than that prevented me from drinking what I needed to drink in that moment.
And when you place yourself in the situation in memory, when you go back to those times, does anything show up in terms of like the first moments you were aware that thirst was there, and then what happened next?
Yeah, you mean things I was feeling, or what I noticed, or
said you were nervous and you were there, and at some points you said it sounds like you became aware of the dry mouth or the
immediately, because it came very fast when I started speaking. And so I think that made me anxious, and I think it was a sort of usually that doesn't happen to me. So if it's happening, that's not a good sign. I felt like, oh well, I guess I interpreted it as I'm anxious.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you noticed the dryness in your mouth, and then the thought that I must be anxious, or I am anxious.
Yeah. I interpreted it as being anxious.
And then do you remember what you did from there? Like the next thing, so I must be anxious.
I try to do my usual thing without being influenced by that. I kind of try to ignore it. I was noticing my lips hard to move, kind of getting stuck with my teeth because it was very, very dry. And I was wondering if people could notice some things weird in my way of speaking, because a little slower, because I was. So I kind of try to keep going, thinking I'll be all right. I'll just need to get in the move, and I'll be all right.
So bringing your attention back into what you're doing there, and what you're trying. Okay.
Not letting that get in the way, I guess. Yeah.
And not letting that get in the way. Does that because that's the way you described it sounds like that. I'm just wondering, does it really does that resonate? You said that kind of quickly. I just wanted to see whether that I'm not going to let this get in the way.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Actually, it's that should not be. There's an image that comes to mind is like it should not be part of the picture. So it's a kind of a weird image, but that's not. That wouldn't be good if people saw that I guess I thought I don't want people to know that that I'm nervous. So I don't want them to know that my mouth is dry. So I don't want people to know that I'm nervous.
So I'm aware that I'm anxious.
Yeah.
I should not let them know that I'm anxious.
Yeah. And actually, as I'm saying that, I realized that maybe I was not too worried about being anxious for me, but more that they would know that I'm anxious.
Thank you.
See, that's already something that I'm discovering now. That's more clear. Actually.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the way it sort of sounded to me. It's like, it's almost like your ACT training kicked in. It's like, I'm anxious. There it is. I noticed that I'm anxious. Yes. Now what's important here is that I do this presentation. So
yes, exactly. I didn't feel like there was a big of a problem. I can deal with it, but I was concerned that they would see it, and that they would already start the workshop on bad ground.
If they saw that I was anxious, that would start things off on the bag.
Yes.
Have a sense of in what way? Like if they noticed that I was anxious, then...
Well, they would already judge me. They would be already... I would lose my capacity. I would lose my credibility. Yeah. And so would not start on a good ground. They would already feel like, who's this guy who, French guy, you know? And I said it on purpose because, like I said, it was the first training I did in the US in a long time. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I felt nervous here in the US. Well, I don't think it usually happen. I've trained in a lot of countries, and I think that was kind of surprising, but I think it might have something to do with being in the US.
Yeah, okay. The things that we know that were present was the awareness that I haven't done this for a while, that this is a little bit different.
Yes.
I'm feeling, mouth is dry. That's the sort of the sensory experience. And then I'm anxious.
Yeah.
And I should get right back sort of into the training. And along with that is also the sense that I shouldn't let them know.
Yes, definitely.
Because they'll know I'm a French guy and I'm anxious.
French guy might be okay, but anxious. Yeah, it's a sense of legitimacy. I was saying credibility, legitimacy.
Okay.
I think I'm thinking of it. I think I entered the room, until the point I entered the room or started to see people coming, I was completely fine. It's the usual. I'm in the hotel, I go to get my breakfast. It's just very easy. And then suddenly I think there was a sense of, but that's not exactly the same context as usually. And suddenly I was not quite sure about my credibility, legitimacy, and
before the dry mouth.
Yeah, I think.
And the interpretation that I'm anxious. There's two things I keep getting curious about. One is there something sort of repetitive about or historical about sort of like pushing aside your own internal experience, even like a sensation or anxiety. And then the other is the sense of possible illegitimacy, or that people will see you as not credible. Okay. So that was happening as well. I'm just curious, which are you more curious about?
It's a great question. I like the way you phrased it. Well, that's interesting. The way you put it is great, because curious is very different than thinking useful or important, and it is really interesting to think of it this way. I guess I'm not very curious about pushing aside sensations and all, but that doesn't mean it's not important. I guess, like I said before we started, right? Like it's like this sort of learning history that leads me to think that it's not important, that's not relevant. So it's hard to bring my curiosity to sensations and how I push them aside. Or
I see. So it folds in on itself, right?
Yeah. And yet it might be important. The part about legitimacy and thing, I feel like it's something that I know more. It's easier to explore that. And maybe I'll stop here so that then we can bring the group together, because I think you're bringing out some interesting roots here. But I would say, and to give you maybe some cues for the next round and the conceptualization, it's not just the legitimacy, credibility, and all. It's how I respond, how it impacts my. I'm hesitating saying the word to give you too much. It's okay, let's put it this way. I think it's part of something bigger in terms of chain analysis or exploration of context response. I won't say more, just just for keeping things
it's like a clue.
Yeah, it's sort of, yes. I don't want to be too easy because, of course, I have all this self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make it a little more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's bring the group and let's take 5 minutes, maybe a little more if needed, but try to keep it fairly focused on looking at what you know from this situation, these points. Try to build a case conceptualization. I know it didn't come really like I have a problem, help me, but it's still that, right? You can still, if you were to actually work with me now, if you had worked with me even for a long time, and I start telling you this anecdote, what would you want to do with that? How would you conceptualize things here? Who want to start? We do it together, so you don't have to have something completely wrapped up. So you can just start with an idea, and together we'll put things together. You can start with a theme. And just what is the theme that stands out to you? Ready? You want to start? Yeah.
So what stood out to me a lot was the credibility piece.
Okay.
You know, you started out by saying this is the first time I've done something in the States in a long time, except for a Worldcon, or that sort of struck me.
Yeah.
And it's not so important that I know that I'm thirsty, but what if they know that I'm thirsty?
Yeah.
So it seemed to be this sort of thread of legitimacy or credibility, or, you know.
Yep.
I was kind of wondering where that started, or how long has that been with you, or.
Okay. What would you be doing, behaviorally speaking, exploring where it comes from and where it started or where it shows up? If you can translate that a little bit in behavioral terms, not to test your behavioral knowledge, but just to link it more to this idea of context exploration.
I think so. I guess I would ask, could you remember a time where you actually that there was not credibility, that actually was something that was a consequence of how you showed up, and what was that like for you?
Okay.
Yeah.
A situation where I was not feeling credible, or
that you actually maybe received some sort of feedback that there wasn't credibility. Like, did that actually ever happen?
Okay.
And what was that like for you?
Okay.
Or is that something that is kind of a construct, right?
Okay.
A cognitive construct for you?
So you want to know if I have an experiential history, right? A learning history from experience, not just from things that I might have conceptualized with regards to credibility. Okay. Let's hear a couple of thoughts here and see how we can then maybe choose something for the next sequence. Thank you, Holly. Sometimes I pause here because I'm thinking from different perspective here. So, who noticed something else? Yeah, April.
I'm noticing that I'm drawn to wanting to ask you more about meaning and purpose around this talk, and what it means for you, and if people don't find you credible, like I want more about purpose and intent. That's kind of where I'm drawn to getting started.
Okay.
So bringing awareness to, I mean, we're getting back to pragmatism and utility, but I'm wanting to start. What I'm going for is bringing awareness first, so that eventually we can get to the pragmatism.
Okay. And what makes you, if you have a sense of it, I know there's a lot of intuition also, and it's good to have that too, of course, but do you have a sense of why you're going this direction?
Yeah, I think because I'm wanting to understand the function of the behavior, that like I understand that there's this rule that says if I let them know that I don't have it 100% all together. I mean, that's what my mind's making up, is that for you, it's like this shortcut between if I don't have everything 100% the way I think it should be, then they'll see me as less than credible, and then it will mean what? And I'm kind of wanting to know what the what is, so I can go all the way back.
I see. Nice. Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. As a way of exploring contingencies too, right? Because
I can figure out, because I just don't know if I can get, I just don't know how much I can get by drawing attention to your emotions in this situation quite yet, or if there's like how you're reacting to those emotions with your behavior, until I can understand more about why it hurts the way it does.
Interesting. Yes, I understand better and better, I think. So before exploring different contexts, you want to have a sense of the broader context, in a way, the meaningful context, right? So that's when I will say, for example, I feel anxious, I don't feel credible. We can connect better to something bigger.
Yeah, because I think, like Holly, I'm also curious about the learning history, but before I go and get examples of like how this has played out before, I kind of want a clue about where we're, what are these verbal antecedents, how am I going to be targeting augmentation eventually down the road. I don't know. I also feel like it's a habitual, I'm noticing that it's also sort of the habitual way that I lean.
Yeah. And I think, fortunately, there's lots of ways of approaching each client situation, I think. And as long as you keep an eye on, is it actually productive and is it actually linked to something? I think it's fine to have even like a sort of habit of where you want to go. I really think it's not a problem. It's like these questions often, should you start with values or not in ACT? It doesn't really matter as long as you don't persist in exploring values when the client is just stuck, fusion, avoidance, cannot really go there. You started there and that unveiled that avoidance was important, and now maybe you're moving there. So it's really not an issue at all. If, for example, you ask me, tell me more about why you're doing these talks and what's important about it, and there is a lot of a sense of, I don't know, maybe some clients' motivation here. It could be actually interesting to understand better the theme about credibility, the importance of what people think of me, for example. Just an idea like that. Okay, cool. Maybe just another thoughts from one of the others, including you, Michael, since we're thinking of conceptualization, and then we'll see what we want to do next with me. Michael, go ahead.
Oh, actually, I was just getting prepared.
Okay.
It's all really good thoughts, and now I have to kind of center myself back down into. I guess one thing I'm aware of is that it seems like the thing I had some curiosity about, but wasn't rigidly tied to, about the choice to sort of block the awareness. Is that's a strategy. So I'm suddenly thinking, oh, that's a narrow repertoire, right? And which then points me back to the other part, is like, well, what's controlling that?
And you're talking really about the lack of awareness of my needs. Is that what you're talking about?
Of a choice of something, of being able to do something about it.
Okay. I feel like I want to say something too, but I need to connect well with the right perspective here. Well, first, here's what we can do. If we're trying to link it to our different contexts here, with what we just said, and you have some different ideas, but they kind of connect. What would you want to make the next bit of conversation about what kind of context would you like to emphasize most? And it's not like it's the one thing you're going to be able to do now for the rest of this intervention, right? It's just like, what would make more sense to you to touch on? Just everybody ask yourself this question, because you might have a different answer and it might be fine. But then how is it related to what you know about me, this burgeoning case conceptualization? Why would you then explore this context or another? And I'd like to hear at least a couple of you saying, I would go with more interpersonal inside the room here, you and I, because I heard this and that, and that makes me think that that would be helpful. Could we hear a couple of... Yes, Lucia?
Oh.
And now you were, I saw that you were...
No.
Yeah.
I don't know. What I was thinking is that probably I would try to go more to like why you're saying this, like, so bring it more to the sort of interpersonal
here
the here and now. Why it is important, why we're talking about this, what comes up for you as we're talking about this, because I have a feeling that the intrapersonal, you've already thought about it a lot.
Okay.
That's so
interesting.
What I imagine, I don't know. Like you've already been thinking about this, and you probably already have like a lot of answers.
That's a very interesting point, Lucia. Thank you for putting it this way. It's true. You're talking to someone who's already, even if you didn't know me outside of this, I clearly have a lot of self-awareness, introspection, and I clearly like to do it too, right? And then I thought that, and actually it's interesting because so that's a very good point. You could say, okay, you know, there are clients like that who are very, very good at exploring. They can get very excited about the whole introspection thing, but you still feel like it doesn't really lead anywhere. Even if you've had this experience, that might be a good cue for going with something more interpersonal here. What are we trying to do here? You seem really to love doing this kind of exploration. Is that something that do you like to do that with me? What's special about doing it together, for example, right? And then you start to get a sense of, oh yeah, maybe the case conceptualization is more about how this guy finds someone who listens to him, or right? These kind of things, right? Yeah, so I like that. Cool, thank you, Lucia. Yes, Holly, also you wanna?
I feel like in picking up what Lucia said, to see, is there an awareness interpersonally of what's happening right now? Right, like what's happening
intrapersonally inside
well you? But to do it in an interpersonal way, like as you're sitting here with me right now, is there something that maybe you're neglecting about yourself, or something
I see. Yeah, seeing if there's something that could be part of the same class, right, of behavior right now that you're not doing. I think that would be great. There's probably, right, there's almost always something for everybody. I think in the moment that could be like that, right? I'm ignoring things so that, and yeah, that's cool. Very, very cool. So Michael is saying you are getting prepared. We could continue with you, but I just want to check first if somebody else would like to do it, so to give opportunities to everybody. Anyone would like to do the next 5-10 minutes with me, taking any direction you want, but with as much intention as possible, starting it, thinking I'm going to explore more this context, then this is, and because, whatever, and you don't have to tell me, but we'll start there. How can I help you volunteer? Holly, do you want to try? And I know you're leaving 15 minutes earlier, so maybe great if we do it now, and maybe we'll do another one for, I think we have time if we stay focused. Let's start. If you can all turn off your cameras, and thank you again, Michael, for this first round. Okay, let's start. So go ahead and re-engage the discussion and take it continue where you want to take me.
So you were in my neck of the woods for this training.
Can you say that again?
You were in my neck of the woods for this training.
Oh, I don't know that expression. My neck of the woods.
Yeah, where I live.
Where you live? Okay.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So that you don't know that expression. So you talked about being sort of a French guy in the States, specifically in the South. Well, I'm saying specifically in the South. So I wonder if there was any feeling of maybe being misunderstood, or I don't know. That's kind of what I'm just thinking of.
I don't know if there was this feeling of being misunderstood. I don't think it's there anymore. It's certainly something that's part of my history, and very strongly at the beginning of being here. And so it could still be part of what activates anxiety, even if I know that now I'm understood. There's certainly some history around that could be reactivating. And when I'm not in the US, often English is not the language, official language, so that could be partly. But I don't think that was the main thing that made me nervous there. I don't have that kind of feedback very much anymore lately. I teach with students and all, and it seems like it's not really a big issue. But it could be something that reactivates sort of a.
Is it connected maybe with credibility somehow? I'm just kind of exploring this a little. I'm not really sure. Just kind of.
It's connected with being criticized, I think.
Being criticized. Can you talk more about
Which
that?
is a very broad category, right? Because I can be criticized because I'm not credible, but because my accent is not like people don't understand well. So that's a lot of things. So what was your question?
Can we talk more about that? I was wondering, so we're
Yeah.
talking a lot about professional criticism and credibility.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder if there's a personal element that might be connected to that as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Can you speak more about that? Or would you be willing to sort of talk more about sort of criticism and
Sure. Can you guide me in a direction? I feel like I don't know how to start.
Okay. So when you say the word criticism, what comes up for you around that word? Like what's kind of powerful or significant or meaningful around that word?
It's interesting because my first response is not something that's very emotional. I feel like, yeah, criticism is great. No problem. It's helpful. I think it's normal to be criticized. I often would like to be more able to criticize other people, but I find often limited in that possibility because I often sense that you have to be very careful when you criticize. And in terms of receiving criticisms, I feel like I've heard that I was sensitive to criticism, but in some ways I feel like that's not really true. So I guess I don't really know. So
you've heard that you've been sensitive to criticism, and yet you feel that that's not really true?
I've heard that from people who know me really well. That's not the feedback I've had from like in my professional work, or in fact the opposite in general. People comment more on open and non-defensive.
Can you say that again? That you're open and
non-defensive.
Non-defensive. That's actually my experience of you too.
Yeah.
As your student, and
I would have guessed. Yes, I would guess that the vast majority of people come to my trainings or and work with me would say that, I think.
Okay. So criticism, even though you mentioned it before, doesn't seem to be something that's really hurting you or troubling you, or?
No, I guess it's a criticism, but what I mean is I guess it's a sort of more like broader than that. It's not being liked, I guess.
Not being liked.
Yeah, I guess I think I was afraid getting in that room with this people that they might not like me. It seems weird because it doesn't seem like that would be a thought that I would have in that moment, but it probably comes down to that. If I feel like people like me, then my behavior changes in a context like that.
So it doesn't seem to be a thought that you would have in that moment, or that anybody would have in that moment, or?
No, I just think that it doesn't feel familiar to think, I hope people like me, I hope people will like me. And yet I can totally buy that it could be that, like more implicitly, it might be that. So it might be, my actual words might be more like, I hope I do a good job. I hope they like the work, or maybe not making it about me, but maybe it comes down to that. I don't know. What I can sense is that if I feel like I'm not appreciated, I guess I will be less able to do certain things.
I feel like I don't know, but I feel like that if people will like me, or if I feel appreciated, I feel like that's a vulnerable piece for you. Is that a vulnerable? Yeah.
Probably. Well, I think I responded a bit fast before actually thinking about it. I guess I was thinking of, of course, but if I think of it, me personally,
what if you don't think of it, right? What if you actually kind of experience what that feels like in your body? Like,
sure.
If I'm not liked, or if people don't like me, or if I'm not appreciated, like where do you feel that? Where do you sense that in your body?
If I think people don't appreciate me?
Yeah, where does that come up for you in your body?
Nowhere really.
Nowhere?
Yeah. That doesn't really evoke
anything
stuff when I say it this way. It's hard for me to have an emotional response or a sensation response just like that. We're talking about something just like that. I don't sense anything.
Okay.
I mean,
so when I use the word vulnerability, did that bring up anything for you?
Intellectually, yes.
Intellectually.
Meaningfully too, but I don't feel specific emotions when I say that. Nothing very tangible. No.
Is that that's something I'm curious about? Is that something that you're curious about?
What part? The vulnerability, or the fact that I'm not having an emotional?
I think both. That both? There's a vulnerability, like cognitively, but not an emotional response to it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's interesting to think of it this way. I know that I mean, it seems like when I look at other people, I guess especially American people, I would say, and many of my acquaintances are therapists, so it's a particular sample, but tend to have more of that sort of emotional connection with speech. It seems to be pretty obvious, visible, facial expression, tone, and even if you ask people, they are more rich in the talking about their feelings. Whereas for me, it's not something that is as there's a context in which it's a bit hard for me to. It's not even hard. Like I have it, I cannot do it. It's almost like it's shut down.
It's shut down.
Like if after our conversation, I could be on my own. I could be listening to music, thinking, and stuff, and I could be really emotional and really notice all that thing. But in this context like that, it's hard for me to contact anything, and I think I don't feel to feel anything.
Is that get in the way of anything, or is that fine? I'm just wondering what that does. Is that
it gets in the way of being better understood, I think, because especially I'm guessing in the US, but probably not just in the US, but like and with my wife Jen, since she's an American also, that's double variable, it gets in the way of being more easily understood. Like if I care a lot about something, for example, I will tend to communicate it more with language and like pointing to how things are interesting. But I might not say I'm so moved, or I've developed that repertoire a bit, but it's not my sort of natural way of going to communicate how things are important.
But it does get in the way sometimes, you're saying. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that sometimes
yeah.
it does get in the way?
Yeah, I think so. Interpersonally, I think it gets I don't think it gets in the way very much intrapersonally, because it's not like I'm shut from my emotions in general.
With interpersonally it gets in the way, did you say?
Yeah, with other people.
Yeah. So can I talk about my experience with you for just 1 second?
Yeah.
So I like you a bunch. You've been my supervisor and will continue to be my supervisor. And I also feel like you know a lot, and you're incredibly credible. And in the moments where, like, maybe if we rewound back a few sentences ago when we talked a little bit about vulnerability, and when you said it might be get in the way of somebody liking me, I wish I remembered exactly what you said, but it was something along that. At the risk of being fappy, because I do not want to be fappy, and I do kind of at the same time, I felt like there was more of a connection. So there was more of like a moment of where your vulnerability allowed me to connect with you on a different level.
Okay.
Other than just credibility, just likability, which is important to me too. But that was an observation that I had. I don't know if that was something that you experienced at all. It was almost like a moment there, and then maybe I noticed you pull back from it.
When we started to talk about vulnerability.
Yeah, and you said about being liked. I'm afraid that they
okay,
wouldn't
I see.
Yeah. Right there.
You felt like we were more connected, or you felt
a little bit more connected in that moment, and then when I asked again, there was like a pullback. I don't know if that's an experience that happens in your life outside of maybe this context.
Yes, yes, it is something familiar in that. I might start to say something that's allows another person to be a little closer, maybe. But they feel like, and then I might, if I sense the person, how would you say in English, leaning in, like sort of trying to get more in, or noticing it, I might probably pretty typically, I think I would tend to I'll try to do it skillfully, right? I try not to be like move away or something like that, but find a way to not make it
not make it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's there. I was about to say not to make it about me, but I'm not sure that's what I mean. And yet, if it's the first thing I'm thinking of, perhaps that's something that's part of my thoughts. I'm not sure.
What was your reaction What was your reaction to my reaction? I'm wondering.
That you shared
just now.
now. Okay, can I be honest completely?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
I'm not trainer here right now. I'm client, right? Just to be clear, because I want to be able to tell you exactly how I respond when I'm like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's something that bothers me, and I feel like you have an experience, and you're not intentionally, I know that, but it's like I feel pressure to connect to your experience, and I feel the strong urge to give you that because I want to be nice to you, and I don't want you to feel I don't want to hurt you. You sense there is connection, you sense that there is something, and so I feel like I need to tell you that I felt that too. That was there too, but I feel like I have to take care of your experience. And what's annoying about it is not that we're talking about your experience, is that it's your experience in relation to me. And so I'm thinking, you basically feel like it's like, oh, you think you know me, but you don't know me. And I feel like that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. Like, yeah.
That I know you, but I don't. That you think I know you, but I don't know you.
Yes, that sounds familiar in things that can annoy me with other people. I mean,
that can annoy you with other people. Okay. So that's a familiar thing. And that does that, and you wanting to sort of please me, does that tie back to kind of being liked or being? Does that tie back to any of that?
The first thing that comes to mind is there's a rule there that's pretty strong about respect, I guess. But if I explore more, it might come down to, because I don't want to be disliked and I want to be liked. It's very possible. I don't. But the first thing is the rule more about being. It's interesting. What is it exactly here? I guess I see that you're doing something out of kindness, or that there's something that, and so I feel like I cannot push you back if you do that out of kindness. That would be disrespectful. That would be not right. You know, something. So I feel like, because you're saying when basically you say I felt more connected when you talked about vulnerability. I feel like you're doing something that's nice toward me, and so I feel like I cannot just say, oh, actually I don't feel like that. I didn't feel that way. I feel like you're really very very harsh to do that.
That was harsh of me to do that? No,
that would be harsh of me to tell you I didn't feel that.
So you just did tell me that.
Yes, I did. Yeah, do you remember how much precaution I used?
How did that go?
I think it's all right, because I feel like I gave some context to really say, basically, it's not about you. So I feel like, and I keep thinking that you know how to not take things personally, and I try to really make it about me to avoid impacting you negatively here. So I feel like I'm relatively okay with that right now. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's interesting to notice all the things I'm doing so that I'm able to tell you that.
I don't feel disrespected at all, or that you were harsh. I'm glad that you said that. And I wonder, you know, if sometimes, like, so contextually, this is different if we were out having a cup of coffee, I suppose, or out having lunch with people, right? This is contextually sort of a therapeutic context. So going in for these kind of moments, right? These maybe micro moments or something.
Yeah.
I don't feel as I didn't feel was out of context, but I really appreciate, or that I didn't feel was not functional, but I really appreciate that you were able to tell me what you told me. Not in and I didn't take it as harsh. I didn't take it as disrespected. I took it as I'm feeling curious. Like, I love that word that Michael brought up before. Like, I'm feeling curious as to, I want to know more, I think.
Okay. I'm watching time, and I know you had to leave 15 minutes early, and Michael too, so perhaps it's a good place to stop here.
Yeah.
So we kept the recording on, so you can watch the rest, and feel free to continue on the list after, because it's hard for you to finish here and then have to leave, but we can definitely continue. Thank you very much, Ali, for taking this role here and having this conversation with me. That was very interesting. And
thank you all. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I feel like I want to hang around. I feel like I want to hang around for 1 minute.
Yeah, the door is open. You can come and go as much as you want.
Okay.
Or can even just audio if that helps. All right, everyone. I think I turned off the camera of somebody. Did I? No. Stefan. No, you're here. Okay. No, I think everybody's here. Okay. All right. So we have about 15 minutes, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What we could put it this way. What do we know now? If we keep thinking in terms of case conceptualization, how can we refine that? What do you think? I'll say, since you don't seem ready yet to share something, I'll say I started this whole conversation with Michael and continued with really wanting to explore something that I don't feel like I've explored. And it's not at all full and new, but it's interesting for me to notice that bringing this topic didn't necessarily lead me to an area that I've kind of started to discover on my own, and I feel like that's really something I would like to explore more. I intentionally didn't say too much, and it's interesting because we ended up in places that I think are perfectly relevant and in potentially useful for me. I mean, we definitely touch on things that are important for me, right? It's pretty obvious. And yet, when to some extent it connects to what I'm thinking of, perhaps even much more than I realize now. But there is a sort of theme that has not been touched on, that it's directly related to this story about the training. So I just mentioned that because it's a good reminder for me that there are often lots of stuff going on, right, that are connected. And even when you find something that's juicy and useful, there might still be something else. And remember that, like, when we explore these different contexts, it's not just so that we will find the one answer, it's that there might actually be different things going on too, right? Anything, Holly, if you want to even share what it was like for you, or some things you're taking from this sequence, go ahead. No? Don't let me have the whole conversation on my own. I could, huh? April, yeah?
I think that connecting with people is really important to you. And that presenting yourself in a way so that other people receive you the way that that their reception of you aligns with your version of you. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. Yes.
And that it makes sense to me that given your experience and just given like cultural differences and where there would be vulnerabilities and relationships where things are just so it feels like everything's on the line and it just matters so much, and I guess it just makes a lot of sense to me that in that situation when you felt the dry mouth and you went from everything's fine to, oh no, they're not gonna find me to be, they're not gonna receive me the way that I really want to present myself here. And that's something that really is important to you. That's as far as I got, and that getting and that sort of bringing it to the right there in the room with Holly, or just very tiny little bit thinking about like your really close interpersonal relationships. There's probably something there about when you're misinterpreted. It just must hurt so much because your intentions are there, and that you really want to connect with people in a particular way, and you're scared that you might accidentally mess it up.
That's very nicely put. Thank you, April. Thank you. I really like this, what you pointed there. There needs to be a good match between how I perceive myself and how people perceive me. That's a key part of my conceptualization of connection. And so then I'm thinking, okay, what do I do to ensure that there's coordination? And when it's not happening, what's my role in that not happening? Right? Is it
yeah,
just
like the thing you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like pretending like you're not human, like you shouldn't be able to stop and tell people you're thirsty and take a drink is the exact thing. Like that is the human thing. Like let's connect around this thing, right?
Yeah.
And I just think, as somebody, and then I'll shut up, but as somebody who started the session today with this really like, this intra-personal focus, it was really cool to watch Holly use this interpersonal approach to really shake things up and help me understand more about why that situation was actually a really big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's great about going with this interpersonal thing in the moment with Holly is that that's something Holly does a lot. So she's not here anymore, but she can tell us more later. But she does a lot because of her FAP background. And I think if you choose a road and you believe in it and you're good at it and you're patient, you don't force it on your clients, but you're patient, I think it will always get to something useful and maybe unexpected, right? Like a big part of me wanted to do something else than what she wanted me to do, because there is something else I wanted to explore, discover, and maybe I didn't feel like that. From my very client perspective, maybe I felt like, oh, that's not what I'm interested in right now, or I don't know actually how would I've responded completely, but it takes me somewhere different, right? And yet inside of that, there is something that becomes really important there that might have been really hard to find if we had done only the intrapersonal part. Yeah. Thanks, April. It was very cool to hear your reflection here. Stefan, Lucia, do you have any observations or thoughts, whatever? Stefan, yeah?
First, I want to say thank you. It was very interesting to watch and to hear your play.
Stefan, you're cutting out, unfortunately. Stefan? Stefan, I think, unfortunately, we cannot hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Try again. It seems like it's back. Go ahead.
Okay. But to find this, I think this balance between our vulnerability and different social roles that we have to fulfill, and they are important for us. For example, in that case, you are a trainer and you want that people perceive you in some way. And the other part that you have your human needs. Like, for example, you are thirsty, or I don't know, you maybe need to go to the toilet or something.
Yeah.
What to do in that situation? And I think sometimes this is very difficult for us because we want to be professional, or we want to be liked or loved from people. But on the other side, we have our more direct needs.
Yes.
I don't know if this is the good part, but so how we can find the balance, how comfortable it's for us to show our human side or our vulnerabilities, and how we are connected with our bodies, for example. We listen what our body is telling us. And here also this gender stuff can kick in, and I don't know, you have your background in Europe, I don't know, for example, how,
Stefan, what you say here really made a bunch of things click Very, very cool. I realize how much I think in terms of case conceptualization here, how much integration is a really important one. And maybe it's obvious to everybody, but for me, there's multiple perspectives here. But and because of that, I also see the connection with the theme of today, with awareness of in different contexts. In many ways, we could look at what I was telling you as focusing really on one context for me when I'm in the room with people. And the interpersonal thing is really important. I need to have an impact on people. I want them to perceive me. So I'm very, very focused on that. And my internal stuff becomes not relevant, or at least not a priority. I cannot allow myself to drink something because this is not a priority right now. And it's even worse than that. It's that because there's also the people would see that I'm anxious, and so that means I'm not a good job and I lose my credibility. So interpersonally, it's interfering. So I have to really put aside a lot of stuff to be able to be completely there. And that's definitely familiar in terms of putting my needs aside to be accepted or something like that. And so I'm thinking of how exploring these different contexts, how useful it can be to work with clients so that we see if they are actually integrating well. Like if we never talk about certain parts of the context, it could be because it's very neglected, for example. Maybe not, but maybe. It might be really worth exploring that and see if that's something that the client can bring inside in the picture.
Yeah, you know, it's a saying in Buddhism. If you're taking care about yourself, you're taking care about others. It's true in both ways.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
If we don't have any energy anymore, then we cannot do anything.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit, but somehow maybe it's a little bit connected. Maybe not so directly.
No, I see what you mean. I totally see what you mean. I'm checking time, and I want to give a chance to Lucia if you want to. Just say no. Thank you very much, Stefan. Lucia, did you want to say a word or so on as we're ending the session in a few minutes?
I thought it was interesting, like to change sort of the context and what Holly was sort of trying to do. It also reminded me how difficult it is with people like yourself. I thought it was very challenging. Like I would imagine, like the actual situation didn't seem challenging. Like you wouldn't say, "Oh, this is a very challenging client," but actually working with someone that's so self-aware is actually very challenging as a therapist, so that you feel like you're really connecting and you're not just like having like everything is in the head as opposed to what's actually what you're feeling and how do they feel. So it did remind me of that, and I was thinking, oh my God, what I would be doing there, and I think I would have found it very difficult.
It's a very good point, and I have been difficult with therapists who do this kind of work, awareness and thing, and yes, that could be a theme of a future session together after we have explored these four main processes. See what are the I think I keep a note on that. It's unfortunately at the end I would have liked to explore that more, but let's just keep a note for that, and maybe even we can talk about it on our list. Because often the fact that the client seems to be really good in one domain might actually get in the way of developing more that skill. Partly because your assessment is, oh, well, they're doing well here. We need to say something else, right? And actually, yes, probably there is some strength, of course. Someone who talks a lot about themselves, introspection, and all clearly has skills, but something is still missing somewhere there. And so, in some ways, what you're saying here about me as you were looking at the interaction is very similar to what I was saying about the demonstration I did at the same training, actually, where I was saying it was weird because in some ways we were gathering information. In some ways she seemed to be able to track, but I had that sort of feeling that it was not really meaningful. It was not really anything very important there. And that's when I stepped back, and we ended up redirecting to the intrapersonal in the room, which became more interesting. By interesting, I mean really like transformative, right? So it's keeping an eye on the context. What is the context is going to be more impactful? It's going to lead more transformation, right? Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that for the next few weeks until we meet again. I'll send you the recording and some guidance for integrating that into your work. And in the meantime, feel free to post any further comments or questions on this topic. Thank you very much, everybody. I was glad that we had the opportunity to have everybody talk a little more, since we were a smaller group, and I hope that will encourage you and feel even more comfortable for the next session, even if it's a bigger group, to participate. So thank you very much again. Bye-bye.
Bye.